Best conference in college football. Who is it? Welcome to the Voice of College Football. We break down the game we all love each and every day with you. Best discussion, debate, and analysis. Leave your comments down below. Tell us where we missed it, where we have certainly stacked up the data, the information, the results, but where we miss it in terms of context. Leave those comments below. Let's look at the Big 12 first and foremost as we rank the conferences, and just about all the data's in. So keep in mind that the conferences are playing against each other now. We're at that point in the season. So the data going forward is just a bunch of games against each other. So we can only truly rank the conferences and evaluate the conferences based on their play against each other and against the group of five in the FCS. Out of conference play determines how good the conferences are. And then, of course, we've got postseason play coming. But for the regular season, this is just about it. Let's go to the Big 12. First and foremost, we've got a 31-12 record for the Big 12, 6-6 against the Power 5. Not a good showing against the Group of 5 of 13-6. So that looks decent on the surface, but keep in mind that Power 5 teams defeat Group of 5 teams between 85 and 90% of the time. So 13-6, not good. 12-0 against the FCS, and you should win all your games, 99.9% of the games against the FCS. In Week 4, TCU defeated SMU, and that has not been an automatic win for the Horned Frogs in recent years. They lost 2 consecutive games to SMU. Horned Frogs won that game by 17 points. Houston with a win over Sam Houston State by 31. Going back to Week 3, we had some prominent matchups, and so the good and the bad here for the Big 12. BYU defeated Arkansas. Nice win for the Cougars and the Big 12 as BYU lost this game at home to the Razorbacks last year by 21 points. West Virginia over Pitt. Nice win for the Big 12, and maybe West Virginia a substantially better team than we knew at the time. Kansas State, though, one of the powers of the Big 12, goes down to Missouri 30-27. The big embarrassment for the Big 12 2 weeks ago was, of course, Oklahoma State getting drubbed by South Alabama. The major wins for the Big 12 this season: Texas over Bama, of course, Kansas over Illinois in a like-seeded matchup between the Big 12 and the Big 10. A slew of bad losses here. We mentioned South Alabama over Oklahoma State. Wyoming over Texas Tech is a 14-point dog. Miami of Ohio defeated Cincinnati. Rice over Houston. Texas State over Baylor. Ohio held Iowa State to just 7 points. Those are all the group of 5 losses. Now, there's some good losses, understandable losses. Baylor losing to a excellent Utah team by a touchdown in the final minute. Texas Tech took Oregon to the brink, actually led that game by 2 scores in the fourth quarter. Iowa State playing up in class against Iowa and playing a rather close game, 20-13. And of course, Colorado TCU, we're going to monitor that one as the season rolls on. But once again, the Big 12 at 31-12, 6-6 against the Power 5, and no more games remaining between the Big 12 and the rest of college football outside the conference. The ACC has been bloodied and battered in recent years, really has not had a successful season outside the conference since 2016. That was when the ACC, based on the results on the field in 2016, was the best conference in college football with a national championship and with the best record outside the conference, including in postseason play. But as we mentioned, ever since then, with Florida State in decline and other teams in decline like Miami, it's been a rough ride for the ACC, but a bit of a bounce back this year. Conference stands at 29-11, 8-8 against the Power 5, and what I love about this is that the ACC plays more games against the other conferences than any other conference. 11-3 against the Group of 5, a perfect 10-0 against the FCS teams. Week 4 results look like this. Miami and Duke both thumped their opponents, Temple and UConn, by 41-7 scores. Syracuse over Army, 29-16. The Orange are still undefeated. Going back to Week 3 in that showdown against the Big 10, the ACC won 4 of 6. Now, they weren't necessarily like-seeded matchups, so the ACC impressive at 4-2. However, consider North Carolina played Minnesota and Duke, one of the best teams in the ACC, taking on Northwestern. Pitt lost to West Virginia. And also Georgia Tech lost to Ole Miss in blowout fashion in the fourth quarter, 48-23. The big wins for the ACC this season, of course, Florida State over LSU. that arguably the best win of any team in the nation thus far. North Carolina over South Carolina. Miami defeated Texas A&M as the ACC stands at 4-2 against the SEC. Really no other horrible losses other than, yes, at the time, Pitt losing to Cincinnati as a touchdown favorite at home. Not a great look for the ACC right there. And then some group of 5 games that factor in North Carolina over App State in overtime. James Madison squeaked by Virginia 36-35. And then Boston College lost to Northern Illinois by a field goal. They also barely defeated Holy Cross by a field goal. And now we see a ton of games that are upcoming between Notre Dame and the ACC. It's the Irish and Duke coming up in week 5, as well as Bowling Green goes to Georgia Tech to take on the Yellow Jackets. Keep in mind that the Notre Dame has defeated the ACC 29 consecutive times and still has yet to play Duke, Louisville, Pitt, Clemson, and Wake Forest. And yes, Clemson fans, I do realize that Clemson defeated Notre Dame in the 2020 ACC championship game. Those are 29 consecutive regular season wins for the Irish, coming off that loss to Ohio State. Now to the irony of ironies in college football. The Pac-12 will be no more after they finish playing this calendar year. And the Pac-12 might just be the best conference in college football. That's what the numbers say. The results say Pac-12. Is that the truth, the reality? Well, we'll see it play out in the postseason as well. But for right now, the Pac-12, stellar. 29-5 overall, 7-3 against the Power 5. That includes a perfect record against the Big Ten. 14-1 in group of 5 matchups. FCS record at 8-1. Stanford, we're looking at you. Week 3 wins for the Pac-12 as nobody played out-of-conference games in Week 4. Washington bludgeoned Michigan State. Oregon State over San Diego State 26-9. The big wins for the Pac-12, of course, Colorado defeating both TCU and Nebraska, and a win against Colorado State that, of course, captivated the nation. Oregon gets by Texas Tech in a nail-biter, so not necessarily an impressive win for the Ducks, but one they had to have against a Texas Tech team that has underachieved. Utah over Baylor and Florida. Again, the Utes didn't necessarily look impressive against the Bears, but they won it. And Florida then turned around and defeated Tennessee, so that game looks even better for the Utes and for the Pac-12. Washington State with a win against Wisconsin. The losses are not bad. Cal lost to Auburn by 4 points. They missed 3 field goals in that game. Mississippi State defeated Arizona. The Wildcats were a 9-point dog on the road, having to travel cross-country and lost in overtime. These are the bad losses. Oklahoma State's a bad football team this year. They defeated Arizona State at Sun Devil Stadium. Arizona State also lost to Fresno State 29-0. So that's not just an embarrassing loss against a group of 5. It's 29-0. And yes, there was an FCS loss in there. Stanford lost to Sacramento State. We have no results from weeks 4 and 5 outside the conference. Oregon State and UCLA do not play anyone in the Power 5. Notre Dame still has 2 games against Stanford and USC. You would think that the Pac-12 is going to lose the Stanford matchup for sure, although, of course, 2022 did happen. It's USC and Notre Dame in one of the marquee games in college football coming up. But for right now, the Pac-12 secure at 29-5. And now on to the Big Ten. And finally, a marquee out-of-conference win for this conference. And it was not easy. Of course, Ohio State going to the brink against Notre Dame, pulling it out on the last play of the game in South Bend. So big win for the Big Ten. Otherwise, we're looking at 5-9 against Power 5s. But Buckeyes pulled it out, so the Big Ten stands at 6-8. 18-1 against a group of 5. FCS record a perfect 5-0. So the Big Ten playing less FCS teams than anybody else. So keep that in mind. Also in week 4, 3 marginal wins for the Big Ten. They got the job done, but that's about all you can say. These were not impressive showings. These were not impressive showings by the Big Ten out of conference this weekend outside of Ohio State. Illinois over FAU by a touchdown. They trailed in that game 10-0. Nebraska defeated Louisiana Tech, not a good football team, 28-14. Indiana survived Akron. So for the second consecutive year, an Indiana opponent missed a field goal at the end of regulation to force overtime, and Indiana survives in overtime, this time against the lowly Akron Zips, 29-27. This is just flat out embarrassing for Tom Allen and his team. Yes, they survived. A win's a win. We get it. It's better than a loss. But Indiana defeating Akron 29-27. Yuck. Go back to week 3. As we mentioned, the ACC over the Big Ten 4-2, but not as bad as the record would show because of the matchups. Michigan State's a disaster. They got clubbed by Washington. And the Big Ten did go 5-0 against a group of 5 that particular week, highlighted by the Ohio State win over Western Kentucky 63-10. No big wins until the Buckeyes got it done against Notre Dame this past weekend. Losses, Illinois losing to Kansas by double digits on the road. Not a horrible loss, but not a good look for the Big Ten. Those are like-seeded teams, similar to Washington State and Wisconsin. Not a good look for the Big Ten. Not that it's embarrassing to lose to a good Washington State team that defeated Oregon State this past weekend, but the Big Ten just losing all these like-seeded matchups. Purdue losing to Syracuse. Also, Indiana played well. This is almost a best loss for the Big Ten out of conference in that Indiana took Louisville to the wire and could have tied up the game at the goal line to finish it off, but the Cardinals survived 21-14. And again, good weekend for the Big Ten as they went 4-0 out of conference to bring their overall record this season to 29-9. This is a down year for the SEC. No other way to slice it. They will be able to make amends on the final weekend of the season against the ACC to a certain extent, and then, of course, in postseason play, primarily in the playoff. However, as it stands right now, there's no other way to slice it. Yes, the SEC might, in actuality, in reality, be the best conference still, with the best talent, with the best recruiting, with the best players moving on to the NFL, and eventually the best results in the games that matter at the end of the year. But for right now, this is not the best conference in college football, and the results back it up. The SEC at 33-8, Power 5 record 5-7, Group of 5 record 16-1. The SEC has played 12 games against the FCS. That's way too many, and there's more to come. In week 4, the SEC held serve against the likes of Texas San Antonio, Charlotte, UAB, and a decent win for Missouri over Memphis, albeit only by a touchdown. There are no great wins for the SEC this season. The best win, you got to consider Missouri on the 61-yard field goal defeating Kansas State, is the best, most up-seeded win that the SEC has on its resume. The other wins were close, not great performances, and they were by favored teams defeating underdogs. Mississippi State over Arizona, Auburn over Cal, Ole Miss over Tulane, the big Group of 5 effort from the SEC. The losses aren't good because the SEC failed in just about all the matchups that were big matchups against like-seeded teams, and most of them weren't that competitive. LSU got whipped by Florida State, giving up 31 consecutive points, losing by 21 points. Bama lost by double digits at home against Texas. Miami completely outclassed Texas A&M 48-33. Arkansas was up a couple scores against BYU at home, a team that they defeated by 3 touchdowns last year. They lost that game 2 weeks ago. And, of course, North Carolina defeated South Carolina by 17 points. All bad losses. Yes, the SEC lost to good teams, but they did not come very close in any of those losses. And once again, we will have the SEC against the ACC on Thanksgiving weekend. Georgia, Georgia Tech, Clemson, South Carolina, Louisville, Kentucky, and Florida, Florida State. If you look at that, probably most likely going to be a split between the two conferences. So when we add it all up, our conference rankings based on results on the field. It's not decisive, it's not completely clear, but it looks like this. Pac-12 number 1, the ACC at number 2, the SEC at number 3, the Big Ten 4, and the Big 12 a fairly close number 5. Yes, the losses are really horrible for the Big 12, but they've also performed fairly well against some good teams outside the conference. Your comments below on which conference is the best, rank them 1 through 5. Would love to see your rankings right here at the Voice of College Football.